Good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder and this is BRN Weekly for Saturday, December 12th, 2020. And our top story this week, an Alzheimer blood test that's available for purchase. Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Lindsay Carlton. She's a healthcare journalist with Very Well Health. Lindsay, great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the show this morning.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. And I know we want to talk about a recent new blood test that you did a lot of work on. But before we get there, let's talk about the COVID vaccine. A lot of developments happening this week. What can you tell us?
So on Tuesday, the FDA came out with a report saying that the Pfizer vaccine, they have found evidence that it is safe and effective. So that's great news, obviously. And if all goes well, they are having a big meeting on Thursday. So we're hoping to get some news at the end of that meeting so that by the weekend, if all goes well, they could have shipments out by Friday and people could even start getting vaccinated by this weekend or even on Monday, possibly.
And that comes on the heels of the UK now is vaccinating its population.
Right.
And, you know, it would be a great thing, I think, as a follow-up to start vaccinating our most vulnerable and our frontline workers who obviously are the most at risk in our society.
That's right. I mean, it is always, it's still up to the states to decide how they're going to distribute the vaccines. But as of now, you know, the recommendation is to go for essential healthcare workers.
Yep.
And then the second population, or some states are kind of going to distribute them at the same time, would be the long-term care facilities. And then the third tier would most likely be the essential workers, whether that's your grocery store workers, that kind of thing. Any kind of essential workers would be most likely the third tier programs for that. But again, it's up to the states to decide how exactly that all goes down at the end.
Yeah, well, I think it's really exciting, and I think a lot of people are peeking their heads up and saying, "Hey, we could actually leave our homes without a mask at some point, maybe in 2021 or early 2022." So let's move on now. I know you recently did a story on a blood test. I think the blood test, correct me if I'm wrong, was for Alzheimer's, if I'm not mistaken. It tests for Alzheimer's. What can you tell us here? This is exciting news, especially for those with family members who are suffering from this dreaded disease.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a test it's a blood test. So you still have to get it prescribed, but it is not FDA approved, but doctors can order it and prescribe it right now. It is available, and it tests a certain protein in your blood to see if you have a certain buildup of it. And if you have that buildup, it is most likely that you may develop Alzheimer's. It's very exciting. There's a lot of mixed reviews out there, though. Some doctors would like to see a lot more of the data released from this company that's making it. They have not released so far, but it is, you know, it could be really exciting for some people to get early diagnosis for this awful neurodegenerative disease.
Yeah, I mean, look, you think about it, if you know that you possibly could have it or people could have it, it's a way to kind of work backwards and say, maybe there are, find ways to cure it or at least dull some of the effects of it. Because it really is a disease that not only hurts the individual and hurts their mind and memories, but it also hurts family members around them.
Right. I mean, it is a disease that does not have a cure at this moment. There are drugs out there that are FDA approved. There's several drugs actually that help with the symptoms of memory loss. So that is kind of like where the science is going. But a lot of the experts that I spoke to also still push that your general health and brain health is still so important to try and make sure that you may not have these types of symptoms or early onset symptoms if you do have a history of Alzheimer's. But then again, there's still like so much unknown that they really call this such a complex disease because, you know, there is a genetic component, but in a lot of cases there isn't. So you really don't know which patients can develop this or not.
Yeah, and for what I've been reading, after reading your article, just in general, I mean, some tips that people have been saying is, continue to work on your cognitive functions, even in retirement. I know people are doing Sudokus and word puzzles and scrambles and jumbles and crossword puzzles to keep their minds fresh. And even if you're in retirement, it doesn't mean that your brain has to be retired. And doing some of those preventative things really can help kind of mitigate some of this loss.
Absolutely. And staying active, even if it's a short walk, or even if you can just get up from your couch and walk around your house for a few minutes, like you said, any kind of like brain activities that kind of get you thinking, or if you can still read a book every now and then, just something to always keep you active. They also say being very socially active is also very good for your brain health. So keeping those connections, obviously it's tough with COVID right now, but with Zoom and Skype and everything else, still talking to people virtually will help. They say it will help with your brain health as well.
Yeah, I would imagine that just in reading some of your articles and others, I mean, people who are in assisted living facilities or who are in that high risk category, they have in a way been isolated from those of us who are maybe a little bit younger and less at risk, because and that social isolation can really play not only on your physical health but also your mental health. And I think there's a lot more focus these days on your mental well-being and how important that is to your overall disposition and your overall longevity.
Absolutely. I mean, your mental health, people kind of sometimes can take it for granted, but you really do at some point in your life need to really focus on your mental well-being as well as your physical well-being. And for the elderly, it's so super important, because as you said, many times their brain health starts to deplete as you get older, and that is obviously a factor of aging. But to age gracefully, you really do need to keep engaged socially and mentally.
And back to this test, you mentioned that it is not currently FDA approved. Is there a plan in the future? I think of like Ancestry.com as an example, or one of those. Maybe it's not Ancestry.com, but there's one where you would put saliva in a test tube, send it back, and I think there were some doubts whether or not that was accurate or what happened with the data. I can't remember. Maybe it's 23andMe. But any sense on whether or not there's a process to take this blood test, to give it a little bit more of evaluation, to look at the data and then get some FDA approvals, maybe not this year because maybe they're working on COVID, but maybe down the line in future years?
Right. So they are working on their FDA approval. I spoke with the co-founders of the company that produced the test, and they are working on the FDA approval. They just kind of harp that it takes a long time, and they said they're hoping that sometime in 2021 that they would have that come along. And at that point, they are also working on publishing some of that extra data, they said, so that people can have more of a sense on the accuracy and the efficacy of the test in general.
And I would imagine that once you get FDA approval, then you can get insurance to underwrite a portion of the blood test. I mean, that's typically, when you go to the doctor to get your cholesterol test or some of your lipid functions tests, right? Some of those things are covered by insurance. I would imagine that because it's not FDA approved, maybe that's not currently part of a covered part of the insurance program.
Correct. So they said as of now, it is not covered by insurance, again, because it's not FDA approved. But in comparison, they talked a lot about right now that if you were going to get early diagnosed or diagnosed for Alzheimer's, a lot of the diagnosis tests lead to PET scans, which a lot of insurances don't cover and are very expensive. Some estimates of $4,000 to $5,000 versus this test reports had, I think it was about $1,300. So still expensive, but a little bit less. PET scans are the gold standard right now in terms of finding that type of plaque in your brain. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see again whether or not they get that FDA approval, and so it can be more accessible and more affordable for patients all over.
Yeah, well, look, you gave us two great stories this week, Lindsay. We had the positivity around the COVID vaccine and also this blood test. I think a lot of families out there are probably breathing a sigh of relief. Lindsay, always a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for joining us in the program, and we look forward to having you back very soon.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Thanks, Lindsay. Great to see you. Thanks for sharing your perspective. And don't go away, because when we come back, we'll be taking a look at some of our best segments for the week. You're going to want to stay tuned right here, BRN Weekly. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Hi folks, Joe Namath here, and if you're on Medicare, this is important. You're now entitled to eliminate copays and get dental care, dentures, eyeglasses, prescription coverage, in-home aids, unlimited transportation, and home-delivered meals, all at no additional cost. Plus, your zip code may have coverage with the Give Back benefit that adds money back to your Social Security check every month. Look, with the uncertainty of the virus and vaccines, you need to get everything you're entitled to. Here's the bottom line. Call to get significant benefits at no additional cost and see if your zip code has coverage with the Give Back benefit. Millions of people have trusted the Medicare Coverage Helpline. You can too. Call now. It's free.
Call 1-800-924-3920. That's 1-800-924-3920.
Welcome back. On Monday, I sat down with Inside Higher Ed's Rick Seltzer to discuss public university employees on the social safety net. Let's take a look.
This is based on a Government Accountability Office report that came out a few weeks ago. And it essentially studied employed adults who are nonetheless enrolled in two public safety net programs, or one of two. Medicaid, which is the insurance program for low-income individuals, and SNAP, which is better known as, or formerly known as, food stamps. And you might have seen discussion on this issue as it relates to the largest private for-profit employers in this country. And by that, we're talking about your Walmarts, your McDonald's. They get a lot of criticism for not paying their cashiers, say, a living wage that would allow them to feed their families or have health insurance, or they get criticized for not providing health insurance. And instead, they get criticized for relying on indirect government subsidies like Medicaid, like SNAP, so that their employees can afford to eat or afford to visit the doctor, can essentially afford to work for them. And we can talk about the merits of the. What's interesting now is the GAO looked at the largest employers of working adults working 35 hours or more a week who were receiving Medicaid and SNAP benefits in several states that provided good data or reliable data. And in addition to those private employers like the Walmarts, like the McDonald's, the Dollar Trees, it also picked up on some major research universities in several states. Indiana University, Purdue University, the University of Maine system, the University of Rhode Island, as some of the largest employers in their state of working adults on these two public safety net programs. Generally speaking, I reached out to the universities that were on these lists, and generally speaking, their response was they're among the largest employers in their states, which is absolutely true, and their workers have a variety of skills and income levels. A few of them said we are working to try to pay people more, Indiana University, I believe, said we have a plan in place, have had one in place since 2017, but the pandemic is setting us back, but we're going to get back onto it. So you see a really varied picture here and a really more detailed picture of how the labor market is playing out on some of these colleges and universities, where we often see the president, or we often think of the high-powered researcher or physician who works for their medical center, but they employ janitors too. They employ other staff members. They employ food service workers. And generally speaking, they will often employ them at whatever the predominant wage is for that field. If you pull back the lens, you can almost think about it as of which route you want the taxpayer to be doing the subsidy. And the question ultimately is, what is the most efficient route for one of the questions is, what is the most efficient route for the taxpayer to be providing the subsidy, or should the taxpayer be providing the subsidy? Because these institutions do have very high paid employees. I don't have the data in front of me for any of them right now, but you look at some of the executives, you look at some of the wages that they pay different people. In some cases, the benefits that they provide to other groups of employees, and there is a real disparity there. So the question is, how do you want to pay for these programs? How do you want to pay for these benefits that, as of right now, we as a society have programs in place to say, here is the minimum level that is available to folks? Well, I think there's certainly a strong argument for that. And I think there's also a strong argument for, I was very surprised when I started reaching out to the universities. I really think a lot of the officials there didn't know. They didn't have data on this. They didn't have good data. They had to scramble to try to figure out what was going on. A lot of them couldn't tell me who exactly these workers were, right? I wanted to know how many people are food service workers who are under this. I didn't get that information. And the other thing that's going on is a lot of these universities have sought to make their budgets balance by outsourcing certain employment. So a lot of places will contract with a food servicer. That wouldn't necessarily have shown up in this GAO report. So I think some of this is maybe undercounted. And I do think maybe some accountability, some more understanding of the structural way these things would work, would allow major employers, including public universities and probably some private ones too, to have a more responsible structure for how they compensate their employees and what benefits they provide.
And on Wednesday, the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, Betsy Mayotte, and I discussed the surge in baby boomer student loan debt. Let's take a look.
Jeffrey, I am so glad that you're talking about this particular subject, because this is older borrowers have been a pet policy issue of mine for a very long time. And I think it's something we need to educate the public and policymakers about. When people think student loan debt, they think it's a young person's issue. The fact of the matter is, half of all student loan borrowers are over the age of 30, a quarter are over the age of 45, and as you pointed out, the fastest growing population of those with consumers with student debt are the over 65s. I talk to borrowers like that all the time. Now, they fall into sort of two categories. They're the borrowers that took out Parent Plus loans or have co-signed on private loans on behalf of their children going to school. And then there's the ones that have their own student loan debt. Maybe they've taken a long time to repay it. A more likely scenario I'm seeing today is a lot of people in their 40s or even 50s went back to school during the 2008 recession. So they just took their loan out fairly recently. And, the tools that are available to them are the same tools that are available to all other student loan borrowers, but they might not be as helpful. Telling someone they can extend their loan debt to 25 years isn't as helpful to a 68-year-old as it might be to a 22-year-old. So we definitely need to address and look for tools that might be more helpful to the older borrower population. Well, it can. If you have federal student loans, they're completely discharged, tax-free, if the borrower should become deceased or becomes totally and permanently disabled. Private loans, on the other hand, whether they're the cosigner or the primary borrower, the policy on that is dependent on the lender. Sometimes that can be charged to the estate. You can't legally change the legality of a debt from one consumer to another, but it can definitely be charged to the estate. I think everybody should get some form of higher education. For some people, that means four-year college. For some people, that means an apprenticeship. For some people, that means a certificate in whatever it is that they're passionate about. You know, if you're someone who's older and is in the middle of a career, and you know that if you get a 4-year degree in that career and you know that you're happy in it, I think it's probably a safe bet to go to a 4-year school. But if you're someone who, you feel it's important to have a college degree, you might not be 100% certain what you want to pursue, absolutely attending a 2-year or community college or just a lower price state school rather than jumping right into that expensive private 4-year private college is probably a really smart idea. Because as I said in the last segment, over 70% of people change their majors. And that's when it becomes expensive, because that's why you end up taking 5 years to finish instead of 4. So you have a whole other year with a loan debt that ends up getting added on. You know, for the quote unquote traditional college student, the general rule of thumb is don't borrow more than the average starting salary for the career that you're considering approaching. I would maybe consider the similar advice to someone who's older, who's attending college, but also to budget the student loan payments before you borrow the debt, and keep your retirement savings in mind. Retirement should come first, no matter what. So if you're looking at, well, if I go and and get this new 4-year degree, if I stop contributing to retirement or reduce my retirement contributions for 10 years, I'll be able to afford the student loan debt. And that's something I would rethink. And that doesn't mean you don't go to school, but maybe it means you only go to school part-time and pay out of pocket. And sure, it takes a little bit longer, but all of this, going back to school is about long-term financial security. And you don't want to screw up the long-term financial security by taking on student loan debt by going back to school. Even better, you might be able to go for free if you go part-time. A lot of employers recognize the value as you just expressed it, and they'll reimburse your tuition up to a certain point. So going part-time, taking a little bit longer, you might be able to get it paid for by your employer. You certainly could reduce the student loan debt. And, an added bonus, as someone who went and pursued a graduate certificate sort of later in life, I was able to get twofers out of it. Some of the projects I had to do for school were.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN Weekly. Have a topic of interest or someone you think we should talk to? Don't forget to drop us a line. And for all the news in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, all in one place, check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow for BRN Sunday. I'll be joined by members of the media, academia, and financial services to analyze all the news this week. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.